Hi, my name is Ethan Marshall, I'm 22 years old, and I just graduated from a small liberal arts college in upstate New York. I grew up in a quiet suburban neighborhood with my grandparents after my parents separated when I was very young. From a child's perspective, life was simple but meaningful, filled with love, care, and quiet stability that many children my age might not have understood or appreciated fully at the time. The neighborhood was lined with maple trees, whose leaves turned brilliant shades of red, orange, and yellow every autumn. Those leaves would blanket our front yard and crunch beneath my shoes as I ran errands or played catch with the neighbor kids. My grandparents, Robert and Elaine Marshall, were not just guardians, they were my world. Robert, 78 years old, had been a highly respected architect in New York City before retiring, and Elaine, 75, had dedicated her life to teaching at an elementary school nearby. Together, they built not just a home but a life that instilled in me the values of responsibility, patience, and careful planning. They weren't flashy or ostentatious, in fact, their lifestyle was modest, but their wisdom, discipline, and love shaped me far more than money ever could. I remember my childhood vividly. On my 8th birthday, Robert handed me a leather-bound journal and said, "Ethan, record what you see, what you think, and most importantly, what you feel. One day, this will make you wiser than any amount of money could." That moment stuck with me. Over the years, I filled countless pages with thoughts, reflections, and observations. Little did I know that this habit would help me make one of the most critical decisions of my life. Growing up with just my grandparents, I had a different relationship with money and responsibility than most teenagers. I learned to appreciate the value of hard work, the importance of saving, and the dangers of envy and entitlement. My parents, though distant, had provided enough to sustain me during my early years, but it was my grandparents' steady guidance that truly defined my understanding of wealth, not just the monetary kind, but the kind rooted in character, wisdom, and foresight. As I approached my senior year of college, my studies focused on economics and finance. Partly, I wanted to understand money better, and partly, I knew that one day I might need to manage my grandparents' estate. I had overheard casual conversations between Robert and Elaine about their savings, investments, and properties, but nothing concrete. I sensed that the topic of inheritance would come up eventually, and I knew I needed to be prepared. Graduation day arrived. It was a crisp, sunny morning in May, and the campus was buzzing with excitement. As I walked across the stage to receive my diploma, my heart was racing, not from the thrill of academic achievement, but from the sense of responsibility that weighed on me. My grandparents were sitting in the front row, smiling proudly. Elaine had tears in her eyes, and Robert's stoic expression betrayed the emotions he rarely showed. When I embraced them afterward, the hug carried a mix of pride, relief, and unspoken anticipation for what lay ahead. That evening, we celebrated quietly at home. There was cake, sparkling cider, and a few close family friends. As the evening wound down, Robert asked me to sit with him in the study. The room smelled faintly of old books, polished wood, and his signature cedar cologne. "Ethan," he began, his voice steady but firm, "we trust you. You've proven yourself, and it's time you learned something beyond textbooks, something about responsibility and legacy." I nodded, unsure what exactly he meant, but I understood the gravity. Over the next few days, I started to research estate planning, trusts, and legal protections. I read every article, legal guide, and financial journal I could find. I realized that a straightforward inheritance might create conflicts. Families often fought over money, even loving families. I didn't want that for my grandparents, and I certainly didn't want to be caught in the middle. One evening, while going through old documents in their study, I discovered the full scope of what my grandparents had built. Between the house, Robert's architectural designs, Elaine's savings, and a few rental properties, their assets totaled nearly $1 million. That's when the idea struck me, establishing a trust. A trust would safeguard their wealth, ensure their wishes were carried out, and prevent disputes. But secrecy was crucial. Family dynamics were complicated. My parents had been estranged, cousins had subtle grudges, and even close friends occasionally offered unsolicited advice. If I disclosed my plans prematurely, it could spark unnecessary tension. So, I resolved to handle everything quietly, learning as much as I could about legal procedures, trustee responsibilities, and asset management. I spent late nights in the study, drinking tea, writing notes in my journal, and meticulously planning. I studied legal terminology, drafted preliminary documents, and even consulted online forums where financial advisors shared insights on setting up family trusts. Each step required careful consideration. Even a small oversight could jeopardize the estate or create loopholes that might lead to conflict later. Finally, the day came to execute the trust. I worked with a highly reputable attorney specializing in family estates in New York. Every document was signed, notarized, and securely filed. The $1 million estate was now under the trust, protected and structured to follow my grandparents' wishes. I felt an overwhelming mixture of pride, relief, and nervousness. It was a private victory, a responsibility I carried silently. The emotional weight of this secrecy was heavier than I anticipated. I had always been transparent with those I loved. Keeping this from my grandparents, even with their consent, felt strange. Each time I shared a meal with them, watched TV, or laughed over old memories, I carried the secret silently. I questioned myself, am I doing the right thing? Will they ever fully understand? Could this hurt them if they discover it later? Throughout this period, I also grappled with ethical dilemmas. I asked myself repeatedly, am I overstepping? Could I be accused of manipulating the estate? To address this, I meticulously documented every step, consulted my attorney frequently, and maintained a journal to track decisions and their rationale. I wasn't just protecting money, I was protecting trust, love, and family harmony. Life continued around me. College friends moved on to jobs, long-distance relationships thrived and faded, and summer days blurred into autumn. But my evenings were dedicated to estate planning and personal reflection. Every choice was weighed carefully. I imagined scenarios where relatives might contest the trust, where friends might misunderstand my motives, or where unforeseen events might force me to act quickly. Each possibility demanded foresight, patience, and precision. By the time I returned home for the summer after graduation, I had mastered not just the technicalities of the trust but also the subtler skills, diplomacy, emotional intelligence, and foresight. I understood that protecting my grandparents' estate wasn't just a financial task, it was a moral responsibility. And in that quiet suburban house, surrounded by the scent of maple leaves and old books, I realized that this chapter of my life was shaping me in ways I hadn't anticipated. I also reflected on the lessons my grandparents had imparted over the years. Robert's discipline in his career, Elaine's patience in teaching, and their unwavering support taught me that wealth is meaningless without wisdom. I wanted to honor their legacy, not just financially, but ethically, morally, and emotionally. The day I finalized everything, I sat in the study, staring at the documents before me. The ink was fresh, the seals intact, and the structure meticulous. I took a deep breath, realizing that this act, quiet, responsible, and careful, would protect my grandparents, preserve harmony in the family, and ensure that the values they instilled in me endured. I closed the folder, placed it in a safe, and for the first time in weeks, felt a profound sense of calm. And yet, deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. The estate was secure, yes, but human emotions are unpredictable. How my family would react when they discovered the trust, or if they ever did, remained uncertain. The real test of judgment, loyalty, and courage had yet to come. As I looked around the study, I saw the photographs lining the walls, family vacations, school events, birthdays, and anniversaries. Every image reminded me of why I was doing this, not for money, not for recognition, but to safeguard the people I loved most in the world. My grandparents had given me everything I needed to succeed: love, guidance, and wisdom. It was now my turn to give back, in the best way I could. Little did I know, the next few months would challenge everything I thought I knew about family, trust, and responsibility. Decisions I made quietly in the study would ripple outward, touching lives in ways I never expected. But for now, in the quiet suburban home, with the sun setting over the maple trees, I allowed myself a moment of pride, reflection, and cautious optimism. Little did I know, the next few months would test everything I thought I understood about family, loyalty, and responsibility. When part 1 ended, I had just quietly finalized the trust for my grandparents' $1 million estate. Everything seemed secure, the documents neatly filed, and the legal framework ironclad. I believed that the careful planning, the secrecy, and my disciplined approach would ensure a smooth transition, at least when the time eventually came. But life has a way of surprising even the most cautious minds. After a few days of calm, I started noticing subtle shifts in my grandparents' behavior. Elaine, who normally hummed while cooking or tending to the garden, became quieter than usual. Robert, ever the stoic and patient man, seemed preoccupied, staring at the fireplace for longer periods, lost in thought. I couldn't be sure if they were sensing something, or if it was just my imagination. I tried to maintain normalcy, making breakfast, discussing books, or watching old black and white films in the evenings. But an unspoken tension lingered in the air. One afternoon, I decided to check on the smaller rental properties that my grandparents owned. It was routine maintenance, nothing extraordinary, but as I walked through the hallway of the main building, a thought struck me: what if someone discovered the trust prematurely? What if a cousin, a distant relative, or even a family friend stumbled upon legal documents? The implications were unsettling. I reminded myself to remain calm, meticulous, and discreet. Every decision now had to be double-checked, every step carefully weighed. Then came the first ripple of unexpected reaction. My estranged father, Daniel Marshall, who hadn't spoken to me in years, called unexpectedly. His tone was casual but carried an edge I hadn't heard in a long time. "Ethan, your grandparents mentioned you've been helping manage some of their finances. Is everything fine?" he asked. My heart skipped a beat. I could sense the subtext: curiosity, suspicion, and perhaps a tinge of envy. I kept my voice calm, measured. "Everything's fine, Dad. Just making sure the properties are in good shape and helping with routine matters." He lingered on the line for a few more seconds, probing with vague questions before finally hanging up. My palms were sweaty. I knew that even a small misstep could lead to unnecessary tension. Days turned into weeks, and I began noticing other subtle shifts. Distant cousins, who had always been friendly but slightly competitive, started asking questions about the estate. Casual remarks like, "Oh, I heard Robert and Elaine are planning something big for Ethan," or "You must be learning a lot from managing their assets," made me uneasy. I smiled, nodded, and deflected, careful not to reveal anything. Each interaction felt like walking on a tightrope. One wrong word could trigger curiosity, suspicion, or resentment. In the meantime, I also had to manage my personal life. College friends were settling into jobs, relationships, and new experiences, while I remained tied to the family estate and the responsibility I had quietly assumed. I spent hours reviewing trust documents, cross-referencing legal clauses, and imagining every possible scenario where the trust could be challenged. It was exhausting, mentally and emotionally. But I knew I couldn't falter. I owed it to my grandparents, to their legacy, and to the values they instilled in me. Then came a particularly tense evening. Robert invited me into the study, where the warm glow of the desk lamp contrasted with the darkening sky outside. He handed me an old photo album and said, "Ethan, we've always trusted you, but sometimes trust comes with invisible weight. You might not see it now, but the decisions you make will ripple across our family, affecting people in ways you can't predict." I nodded solemnly, understanding the gravity of his words. I knew he wasn't referring to the legalities of the trust alone. He was preparing me for the emotional complexity of family reactions. Shortly after, I faced the first direct challenge. One of my father's friends, who occasionally visited during holidays, casually mentioned that he heard the estate had been adjusted recently. Though the remark seemed innocent, I sensed the underlying suspicion. My mind raced through possibilities. Had someone accessed confidential information? Had there been a slip in discretion? I remained composed, internally documenting everything and ensuring that no trace of our private actions was exposed. Despite these challenges, there were moments of quiet reassurance. Elaine, who had been subtly distant, invited me to her study one evening, smiling gently. "Ethan," she said, "you've handled everything with grace. Remember, it's not just about money, it's about preserving harmony, integrity, and the values we hold dear." Her words reminded me why I had undertaken this responsibility in the first place. It wasn't simply about safeguarding $1 million estate, it was about protecting a legacy of love, wisdom, and careful planning. Then came a surprising turn. My grandparents' old neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, who had known me since birth, reached out. She had noticed my increased involvement in family matters and casually asked if I had been helping my grandparents plan anything. Again, I deflected, careful to maintain discretion. But her subtle probing made me realize that news travels faster than expected. I had to be vigilant, not just legally but socially. The smallest hint could trigger curiosity and potentially unsettle family dynamics. In parallel, I continued to manage my personal growth. Reading, journaling, and reflecting became my anchors. Each night, I would sit by the window, journal in hand, and write down the day's events, thoughts, and feelings. I explored questions like, am I doing the right thing? Could my secrecy backfire? How will family members react if they learn about the trust before the intended time? The act of journaling helped me process anxiety, anticipate potential conflicts, and remain focused on the ultimate goal, protecting the estate and honoring my grandparents. As the weeks passed, I also started noticing subtle shifts in my grandparents' behavior. Robert seemed to watch me with a more scrutinizing gaze, though never overtly suspicious. Elaine, on the other hand, occasionally smiled knowingly, as if acknowledging my efforts and the quiet weight I carried. It was a delicate balance, maintaining normalcy while bearing a secret that could fundamentally alter family relationships. One evening, I overheard a conversation between my father and a distant cousin. Though I didn't catch everything, I discerned their curiosity and subtle jealousy. They speculated about the changes in the estate and Ethan's involvement. My heart raced, but I remained hidden, careful not to reveal myself. This moment crystallized a key lesson: secrecy is not just about hiding documents, it's about navigating the delicate web of human emotion, perception, and subtle influence. Amidst these tensions, I found solace in small routines. Morning walks around the neighborhood, tending to the maple trees, and helping Elaine in the garden became therapeutic. These activities reminded me of simpler times and reinforced the reasons behind my careful, quiet actions. Protecting the estate was not an abstract task, it was deeply personal, intertwined with memories, love, and respect for my grandparents. By the third month after graduation, I realized that managing reactions was as important as managing the estate itself. I had become attuned to subtleties, changes in tone, lingering glances, and the unspoken language of concern or curiosity. I learned to respond with diplomacy, patience, and calm reasoning. One misstep could escalate into conflict, so I approached each interaction with care, weighing every word and gesture. Then came an unexpected development. A distant cousin, Mark, visited for a family gathering. Unlike previous encounters, Mark was direct, asking pointed questions about my role in managing the estate. I could sense underlying motives, curiosity, envy, and perhaps a subtle desire to test my resolve. I answered calmly, emphasizing my grandparents' guidance and my own focus on learning, but I remained guarded. Every sentence was deliberate, measured, and carefully phrased to avoid revealing any confidential information. That evening, after Mark left, I sat in the study with Robert and Elaine. "You handled that very well," Robert said, his tone a mix of pride and relief. "Ethan, family can be unpredictable. Their reactions may not always be rational, but your patience and discretion are what matter most." Elaine nodded, adding, "Remember, it's not just what you do, it's how you carry yourself, how you maintain trust, and how you protect relationships." Their words reinforced my understanding that estate management was inseparable from emotional intelligence and interpersonal skills. Despite these pressures, I also experienced moments of quiet triumph. Successfully deflecting probing questions, anticipating reactions, and maintaining secrecy provided a subtle but powerful sense of accomplishment. I began to see that the trust was not just a legal structure, it was a tool for maintaining harmony, ensuring respect, and safeguarding a legacy that had taken decades to build. By the end of the 4th month, I had developed a routine. Morning reflection, legal review, family interaction, and evening journaling became the framework of my life. Each day presented new challenges, unexpected questions, subtle hints of suspicion, or minor conflicts, but I had learned to navigate them with grace, patience, and foresight. The estate was secure, the trust was in place, and I was growing into a role that demanded wisdom, discretion, and emotional resilience. And yet, I knew the biggest challenges were still ahead. Managing reactions was one thing, unexpected events, unforeseen crises, or deliberate attempts to disrupt the trust could arise at any moment. I needed to remain vigilant, adaptable, and emotionally strong. The months of preparation had been just the beginning. The next phase would test not just my skills but my values, integrity, and courage. Looking back on this period, I realized that part 2 of my journey, navigating family reactions and managing emotions, was as critical as setting up the trust itself. Without careful attention to human behavior, even the most meticulously structured estate could become a source of tension, conflict, or betrayal. I had learned to read subtle cues, anticipate motives, and respond with calm logic and empathy. These skills, honed through quiet observation and careful planning, would serve me well in the months and years to come. Months had passed since I quietly executed the trust for my grandparents' $1 million estate. The routine of managing secrecy, anticipating reactions, and maintaining discretion had become a part of my life. I had grown accustomed to the quiet tension, the subtle glances, and the occasional probing questions. But nothing could have prepared me for the day the trust was finally revealed, a day that would challenge my understanding of family, loyalty, and the consequences of actions taken in secrecy. It started on a calm Sunday afternoon. The sky was pale blue, and the air was crisp with the onset of early autumn. I was helping Elaine arrange some old photo albums in the living room when Robert asked me to step into his study. The room smelled faintly of cedar and old paper, familiar and comforting. He handed me an envelope and said, "Ethan, it's time. Your grandparents want you to explain the trust to the rest of the family. We trust your judgment." My heart raced. This was the moment I had both anticipated and feared. For months, I had carried the secret alone. The trust had been designed to protect our family, prevent conflicts, and honor the legacy of Robert and Elaine. But now, I would have to reveal everything, to relatives who had been curious, perhaps envious, and certainly unprepared for such transparency. I gathered my courage, rehearsed what I would say, and invited the immediate family for a meeting at our home. The living room was filled with my parents, distant cousins, and a few close family friends. Everyone sat tensely, exchanging polite smiles and cautious glances. I took a deep breath and began. "Thank you all for coming," I started, my voice calm but firm. Over the past few months, I'd been entrusted with a responsibility by Robert and Elaine. They wanted to ensure that their estate, which they've worked hard to build, is protected and managed responsibly. To achieve this, we've established a trust, a legal structure that safeguards their assets and ensures their wishes are honored. I could feel the room shift. Some faces reflected curiosity, others skepticism, and a few, like my father's, seemed uneasy. I continued, carefully explaining the purpose of the trust, how it worked, and why it was necessary. I emphasized that it was designed to prevent misunderstandings, maintain harmony, and protect everyone involved. Everything has been done legally, ethically, and with the full knowledge of Robert and Elaine, I concluded. The goal is not to exclude anyone, but to ensure that the legacy they've built is preserved and respected. There was a heavy silence. I could sense the processing, the internal debates, and the clash of emotions behind each face. My father's expression was unreadable, my distant cousins exchanged whispers, even a family friend cleared their throat nervously. I waited, letting the information settle, giving everyone the space to absorb what I had just shared. Then came the first reaction. Mark, my distant cousin who had questioned me before, leaned forward and said, "So, Ethan, you basically controlled everything without telling anyone? Isn't that a bit much?" His tone was challenging, almost accusatory. I remained calm, explaining again that secrecy was necessary to prevent disputes and that the trust had been designed with fairness and transparency in mind once it was revealed. Slowly, reactions began to vary. Some family members were skeptical, struggling to understand why I had acted without prior disclosure. Others, particularly those who knew my grandparents' character and trusted me, nodded in approval. Elaine smiled warmly, placing a reassuring hand on my shoulder. Robert's eyes reflected quiet pride. The conversation grew deeper. Questions arose about specific assets, the structure of the trust, and how decisions would be made in the future. I answered honestly, calmly, and transparently, using the knowledge I had gained over months of research and careful planning. I emphasized that my role was not to control but to manage responsibly, guided by the values instilled in me by my grandparents. As the discussion continued, something unexpected happened. My father, who had been silent for much of the meeting, finally spoke. "Ethan," he said, his voice tinged with both frustration and admiration, "I didn't understand why you acted this way, but I can see now, you've thought of everything. You've protected Mom and Dad, and the family, in a way I never would have imagined." The tension in the room began to ease. Cousins who had initially expressed skepticism began asking practical questions about how they could contribute to maintaining the properties, suggesting ideas for renovations, and even volunteering to help with management. The conversation shifted from suspicion to collaboration, and I realized that months of careful planning and patience were beginning to pay off. Over the next few weeks, the family slowly adapted to the new structure. The trust allowed everyone to have clarity, preventing misunderstandings and potential conflicts. I continued to act as a facilitator, ensuring that communication remained open, decisions were transparent, and everyone felt included. It wasn't always easy, misunderstandings arose, and emotions flared occasionally, but the foundation laid by the trust provided a framework to navigate these challenges constructively. One day, I found myself reflecting on the journey. I remembered the quiet nights spent in the study, the hours of research, and the weight of secrecy I had carried alone. I thought about the ethical dilemmas, the moments of doubt, and the strategies I had employed to manage family dynamics. It struck me how much I had grown, not just in knowledge or responsibility, but in empathy, patience, and resilience. Elaine and Robert noticed the change too. They often commented on my maturity, my ability to navigate complex situations, and my commitment to preserving the family's legacy. Their quiet pride was deeply reassuring, a reminder that my efforts were not just about money, but about honoring the values and lessons they had instilled in me over a lifetime. The climax of the story came unexpectedly during a family reunion, a few months after the trust was revealed. Extended family members, who had previously been distant or skeptical, approached me privately, expressing gratitude for the careful planning and foresight. One cousin admitted, "I was frustrated at first, but now I see, you did the right thing. You protected the family and prevented a lot of potential problems." These moments of acknowledgement were profoundly rewarding, confirming that the difficult path I had chosen was indeed the right one. Even with these positive developments, the journey was not without challenges. Managing human emotion, family expectations, and unforeseen circumstances required constant attention. I had to remain vigilant, mediate disputes, and ensure that the trust was implemented in alignment with my grandparents' intentions. Yet, these challenges became opportunities for growth, teaching me negotiation, diplomacy, and the delicate art of balancing fairness with responsibility. Looking back, I realized the true value of the experience. The trust had not only protected assets but also preserved relationships, strengthened bonds, and reinforced values of integrity, foresight, and empathy. It had taught me lessons that no classroom ever could, shaping me into someone capable of handling complex situations with thoughtfulness and care. One quiet evening, I sat in the study, reflecting on the journey from the moment I graduated to the present day. The sunlight streamed through the maple trees, casting warm patterns across the floor. I thought about the subtle shifts, the unexpected reactions, and the eventual resolution. I realized that the careful balance of secrecy, preparation, and ethical action had not only safeguarded the estate but also nurtured trust, respect, and understanding within the family. Robert and Elaine joined me, sitting quietly as we watched the sun dip below the horizon. "You did well, Ethan," Robert said simply. Elaine nodded, adding, "You honored everything we taught you, and then some. You've grown into someone we can be proud of, in every sense of the word." As I looked around the room, at the photos, the memorabilia, and the sense of quiet harmony, I understood that this experience was about more than money, legal documents, or family disputes. It was about responsibility, love, foresight, and the courage to act wisely even when no one was watching. In the end, the trust became more than a legal safeguard, it became a symbol of integrity, maturity, and the enduring bond between generations. The family, once skeptical or distant, had come together with a newfound understanding, appreciation, and respect for both the legacy of my grandparents and the careful stewardship I had provided. And as I sit here today, reflecting on the months of planning, secrecy, challenges, and eventual resolution, I feel a profound sense of fulfillment. I know that the $1 million estate is secure, yes, but more importantly, I know that relationships are preserved, trust is maintained, and the values of integrity, patience, and foresight will continue to guide our family for generations to come. The journey was not easy. There were moments of doubt, fear, and frustration. But the outcome proved that careful planning, ethical action, and emotional intelligence can navigate even the most complex family dynamics. And in that, I found not just relief, but a deep, enduring sense of purpose and pride.